Do you consider yourself a high achiever? Smart, driven, highly successful? I am so excited to have you. My name is Julia Arndt and I'm the host of the Stress Podcast. I will help you develop your stress resilience the same way you've developed your workplace superpowers. Learn peak performance tools to thrive at work and in your personal life. Let's get started. Hi, and welcome back to Stress, the podcast to develop your next workplace superpower. I am really excited to do a personal introduction today to this podcast episode, which is something that I know I haven't done in a really long time. But today I felt particularly inspired to say hello to all of you and to share something super special with you. I just got off a call with the Academy of Peak Performers, which is my monthly and weekly group coaching call for peak performers that want to develop their next workplace superpowers and need some accountability and commitment, and obviously want to get some new insights into how they can sustain their performance over time. And this month in the Academy of Peak Performers, we talked about the art of imperfection. And every month, at the end of the month and for the last week of the month, I invite a guest speaker to the group in order to share a new perspective with us, a different perspective on the topic of the month. And this month, I had the pleasure to have Sahar Yousef, who is the faculty at UC Berkeley, and she is a neuroscientist, a brain scientist, and she talked about the power of obviously imperfection, but she really dove into the topic of procrastination. And it resonated so deeply with me, and obviously also with the people that were on the group coaching call, that I was thinking already while she was speaking that I have to absolutely share this episode with you on the podcast in order for you obviously to learn more about how you can overcome procrastination, but also to get a little bit maybe an insight into what we are talking about on a weekly basis in this group and how we are holding each other accountable and how we are growing together in order to help each other be stronger human beings. And this month, for August and September, we are actually taking a summer break of the Academy of Peak Performers, and we're starting back up on September 1st, 2021. Because I just thought to myself, I need a little creative break. Everyone wants to enjoy their summer, especially after a year of being in lockdown. I think we all deserve to just disconnect for a little while. But I am really excited and inspired for this creative break because I know that a lot of ideas will come, and I really hope that on September 1st, 2021, which is the first Wednesday of September, we are going to start back with the Academy of Peak Performers. So if you are interested, check back in or sign up for my newsletter to get some information once the Academy starts back up. Just to say that on the side, but obviously I want you to enjoy this podcast episode. So I really hope you're feeling inspired by this. I really hope that you are learning a couple of really interesting insights on how you can overcome procrastination in the future. And if you have any questions for me, you can always reach out to me. You have all of the links and all of the contact information in the show notes. And without further ado, I wish you a wonderful podcast episode, and I really do hope that I hear from you soon.
I know I wanted to at least spend a couple of minutes defining something that has been on my mind, and I'm so thrilled that everything that you all have been talking about has been alluding to what I consider to be the second P word. Julia already mentioned it verbally. And she didn't even know what I was going to talk about. She was kind enough to just say, just show up. And I'm like, okie dokie. It will be imperfect for sure. So, because I'm in the middle of a move, but that's fine. So I won't have any slides prepared, but I have a topic that I was thinking about quite a bit actually yesterday on the topic of, sort of the art of imperfection. And it's the second P word, and that's procrastination. Mm-hmm. And from a cognitive lens, perfectionism and procrastination go hand in hand in a very deeply intimate way. And I'm not sure, and I don't know if this has already come up in conversations you all have had this term. Okay.
I mean, we've kind of mentioned it, but we haven't really dived into the topic. So I'm glad that you're bringing it up.
Okay, good. Okay, so I will give you all, in case it's of interest, a cognitive neuroscientist sort of perspective on the topics of both imperfection as it relates to procrastination. And I will begin by talking about procrastination first and defining it, from the research lens and what we know about procrastination. And then we'll sort of loop in perfectionism. And it's something that has been very close to my heart. As you all know, I teach at the university at Berkeley, and I teach MBA students. So they're actually all within sort of our age range, and dealing with jumping in the water or being thrown in the water, for better or worse. And this is a topic that I know is close to everyone in that group. And it's going to be close to everyone in this group because of something that we all call high performance or peak performance. I'll have it all make sense in just a second. But defining procrastination first, I'll start off with a bit of a story and a research story. It's a data story, as hopefully as interesting as that may be, and a joke. 1997, so about mid to late 1990s, is the time in the history of this sort of science that researchers finally figured out and started to research what procrastination really is, which I find absolutely hysterical, because humans have been procrastinating for a millennia. Humans have been procrastinating since the beginning of time. It's a natural part of what it means to be human. But it took until the late 1990s, evidently, for anyone to study it, which is super silly to me. But the biggest leading theories, right? When we hear procrastination, imagine if, you have a friend who's like, oh, I'm going to go to a procrastination workshop. What do we imagine is going to be in that? Time management. It's going to be like getting things done, GTD. I don't know. There's going to be some like systems and frameworks around getting things done, but it will more likely than not be these sort of productivity systems related to time and how to manage your time and how to manage your tasks and all of these other things. Here's the big issue. Procrastination is not a time management issue. It is, in fact, every single study on young people. So this is typically around, they've done a couple of studies on below 18, but typically it's in those college years, 18 to 22, 23, 24, that range. Even studies that they've done on folks in their senior years procrastinating, men, women, people of all different walks of life. Studies done around labs all around the world all point to one singular reason why humans procrastinate, and that is something called emotional misregulation. And this was a very big, aha moment in the literature in the late 1990s, because everyone assumed that it was about attention deficit. Everyone always assumed that procrastination was about people not being what's called, by the way, again, sorry for the jargon, but goal-oriented attention regulation. That's the long term for it. But it is a human being's ability to keep their eye sort of on the prize, keep your eye on the goal, and to deal with the swerving that happens in your attention. So when you notice you want to do something else, you go, grab it, and you drag it back, and you keep going, and you keep going, and you keep going. They said, oh, maybe these people are just missing that trait, that ability, and that's why they're procrastinating. It's nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with you're feeling something. And this was the big aha. When human beings, when all of us, and I've been procrastinating on many things right now. So we're all in the same boat. And I'm going to bring it back to perfectionism, because this is something that I hope you all lean into this moment. Procrastination is actually less of an issue in low performing populations. And I think people don't talk about that enough. When people talk, and I know this, I used to teach younger folks at Berkeley, so undergraduates. How many times over the years I've been asked to do productivity workshops and sessions during orientation, and doing, for all of these different groups of young kids, ostensibly, that are trying to study, right? And everyone thinks that it's about, these other things, but you see procrastination when the standards for performance are so high internally that I am afraid of not meeting it. Therefore, the feeling and the emotion that I have that I'm not willing to admit that I have is fear. And that fear is what makes me procrastinate. So yeah, Fatsu's smiling, and this goes back to everything you were talking about. That beautiful, we need a partner together and give a TED talk on this topic, right? It's about swimming in the waters,
Let's do it.
Yeah, even with the eels and the sharks, you just got to jump in. But that is truly Right? This is the whole point. This is the whole point. And it's, so I'll now sort of break it down. An easy way to always remember this. So remember, procrastination, the definition of procrastination is misregulation of emotions or emotional misregulation. You're having a feeling deep inside of the onion that is you. Behind all of those layers, there's some sort of emotion. That emotion is typically one of two things. It's usually either fear or it's what we call physiological stress or anxiety. Those are the two. Those are the top two, at least, emotions that are happening deep, deep, deep inside. So what's happening in the background, there's something that I call the balance equation, always happening in the background. And I'll use some props here. I now have a very boring background, but I'll try to make up for it by grabbing these two things. Okay, there we go. Okay, so there's always a balance happening in the background, inside of our brains. And that on either side, and I don't know if I'm lost in my own sort of Persian English translation, balance as in a scale. Yeah, okay. So like, yes, so you measure weight on it. On one side, you have your sense of self, your identity. It's how you feel about yourself, and more importantly, how you feel about your skills. On the other side, you have the task in front of you, the water. You have the project. You have, it's Saturday morning, I just got up. I have not touched the kitchen or the house all week, and the house looks like a level of mess that I'm just not willing to deal with. And now I have to clean the whole damn house. And this is how you feel about yourself. And this is the task in front of you. And then you have this on the scale. And right now, look at what's happening. This is obviously heavier. So this is what happens. So I am lighter than the task. The moment this misalignment happens, this is when we procrastinate. If you feel like the task at hand is heavier and larger than you are, that is when, according to the balance equation happening inside of your own mind, this is when we avoid tasks. We avoid doing things because of that anxiety and because of that fear. And it's not, I mean, your brain is doing the math right, by the way. Because if you perceive the task as being way heavier than you, you have no business undertaking that. And by the way, Fatu, I don't know, most people don't, I don't really know how to swim or ride a bike for that matter. I don't have a lot of physical skills. But, so unlike, I think most of you, I have very little to no athletic abilities. But so maybe one day we could all get together, and between Fatu and Julia, we could all like learn how to swim and do fun things together. Yes, but sure. We're making a long list of things we all need to do together. Make a TED talk, learn how to swim. But I should not be probably swimming in the open water on my own yet, because my abilities are not that heavy. So I don't have that much ability. So the thing in front of me is quite large. I probably need to just be in a swimming pool in the beginning. So I'm saying my math isn't wrong. My brain's being honest. It's saying, this is you don't have the skills to do that. But here's the problem. Our brains, the math is always done right. I want you to remember this. The math is always done right. But remember the other P word, the third P word that I used that is deeply related to both procrastination and perfectionism, and that is perception. Your perception of your identity, your perception of your skills, your perception of the history of what it means for you to have done something correctly, perfectly, blah, 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 blah. Those memories, that's a perception of how you see you and your own sense of self. And it's your perception of the task in front of you. Assuming, so if you think of the philosophy of math here, or just theoretical math, you have to assume that the inputs are accurate. But your math in your brain is always spot on. The problem is that it's the perceptions that are warped. The perceptions are what are confusing and not accurate. So the balance equation, there's only one of two options, right? This is like a relatively, I hope it's an easy, and Lord Almighty, this is full. Okay, so this is a relatively easy way to remember this. There's always this equation happening. The scale exists in the brain, and this dictates with what fervor and excitement you go about doing the tasks. So if you are heavier than the task is easy, you jump at it, you get it done, and you move on and you feel good. You get the dopamine for finishing it and you move on. Think of something, how easy is it for you to send an email? We send emails like all day, every day. Like not a really...
You'll be surprised, you haven't met me.
It depends on the email though. But imagine like a really light email.
Yeah, if you'd say awesome, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Like, right, like think of like the easiest possible thing where you know without a shadow of a doubt you can do it in like half a second, it's done, it feels good, you get it out of the way, where you by default are always heavier than the task in front of you. Then the equation says go for it. But the moment you are lighter, the equation says But the thing is, we don't know about the balance equation. We don't learn about this stuff in school. So what instead happens is we procrastinate. And unfortunately, high performers, and now remember what I said before, high performers are more likely to procrastinate than low performers. Why? It's because, well, two reasons. It's both sides of this equation. Whatever task is in front of them, it needs to be done perfectly. Their standards are very high. They want to make sure it's done well. So by default, any task. So if you take someone who honestly doesn't care about their career, they don't care about their professionalism as much, they don't care about the outcomes of what people think about them, do you think they would care about answering an email? No, of course not. They're just like, they'll send like 5 typos, like no punctuation. It's like a hot mess. And they're just like, whatever. And then just like send it off because they don't care. So that all of the tasks by default on their side, on this side of the equation, are actually rather light.
Yeah.
Even if they don't necessarily feel super confident in themselves. Sometimes with, unfortunately, by the way, some research on folks who are either average or just low performers, sometimes they also have an inflated sense of self, which I find very fascinating. With high performers, you always get one thing, and that is a low perception of own skill and identity. And the standards for the task are super heavy and huge. And when you get that, you get perpetual procrastination because of the perfectionism. It's all deeply tied. So it's you procrastinate because of the perfectionism, and you're a perfectionist because of warped perceptions. It's the 3 Ps that are all interconnected with one another. And it's super messed up, but it is, according to research, again, all around the world, this is what we do, why we do the things we do. So what are the 2 options for balancing the equation here?
I mean, you can.
Emotions.
What was that?
Right? To manage your emotions.
Well, it's so remember, you have the fear, you have the emotion because this is out of whack. It's not balanced. So it's almost like I almost want to say, yeah, we could deal with the feelings, but how much easier would it be if you didn't have to lie to yourself and like kind of like, like deal with feelings, and you just actually fix the catalyst for the feeling in and of itself. If you go back one layer, it's the fact that your brain says, like, Julia, we don't have what it takes to do this project right now. You are not enough. Therefore, procrastinate and do something else first. So then what do? We go to the kitchen, we make a sandwich, we get a snack, we have another cup of coffee or tea, because it's like what your brain is saying is that this task is huge. We're up here. So I need to add stuff to my pile to make myself heavier so that I come into balance with the task, and then I can go do it. So then we clean our desk. We send 5 more emails. We make a cup of tea. I do all of these things. I reorganize my to-do list as if I needed to do that. Like, all I'm doing is I'm just adding weight to this side. I'm like, if this is just me by myself, naked, obviously I'm never naked, Sahar with 50 layers on, but this on this side of the equation is just me and my sense of self, my baseline abilities. If it's not heavy enough for my balance equation, then I'm just going to add stuff to it. I'm going to add.
That's so interesting. Wow.
Yeah. So
that's fascinating.
Isn't that the definition of procrastination? Is that we're avoiding dealing with this task until we feel better, until we feel like, then this is the end of the road. That's by the way, the harder way of dealing with procrastination and perfectionism.
Like making yourself heavier, that one?
Yeah, because that's like, you might as well just go to therapy and like deal with your sense of self and your identity. It's like developmental issues. And it's like a teacher said to you when you were in 2nd grade that made you not feel as like, great about yourself. That's harder stuff. That's the deep stuff where you got to get in there and excavate and really start to reinforce feelings of mastery and that sense of self. And every single time, by the way, you do kick ass and you do a project well and you do something really properly, you need to actually instantiate that in the database of your brain. And this is something, by the way, high performers also don't do. I know like Amy's kind of giggling about this. What do we all do? Let's say there's 2 different projects. This one I kind of sucked at, but it happened. I finished it. Whatever. We've moved on. This one kicked butt. It was perfectly fine. Everyone said it was great. What do I remember?
The other one.
I don't give myself credit ever. This never gets put into the database so that my sense of self is by default heavier. This is what I mean by this side of the equation is harder to deal with. This is hard work, but it will pay off dividends for the rest of your life. If you want to start to slowly work on your sense of self, you need to start to give yourself credit for all of the things that you do well. Every single time you do what you say what you mean, and you do it the way that you thought you were going to do it, you have to acknowledge it. And if you do not psychologically and cognitively acknowledge it, this sense of self is the same sense of self that you had since you were maybe 11. We're still I feel safe enough in this space to say this, but we're still that little girl versions of all of ourselves that are just trying to make everything perfect and organized and check all the boxes. And we're just petrified that it's not going to happen.
But I think the problem with filling that side as well is that once you're doing all of these things, right, you're getting a coffee and you're sending emails and you're organizing your desk, is that then at the end, when maybe the cup is fuller, you don't have time anymore to actually start that heavy task. So you go into the next day and then you kind of do that all over again, right?
Totally. Unless you're like a night owl like I am. Sometimes I procrastinate and then I actually do have an energy boost in the evening and then I'll like actually get it done. But this is not a sustainable way of doing it. So so I want to actually push all of you all this week to try something different. So this, I encourage all of us, including myself. We should work on it for our future generations for sure. But this is a lot easier to deal with because this is just a task. So
you can break it.
Yeah, you break it down. You take the big project and then you say, okay, well, what if I only do 1/5 of it? And none of the rest of it exists. It's just 1/5 of it. And on the other side is me. Oh, well, I guess I could do that. I can't do all of that. I can't do that big project. So tearing apart the other side is far easier. So just literally doing what's called task breakdown, like literally breaking down every single task. And I will give you all a few examples of things that literally this past 2 weeks, this is what I mean by it's top of mind. Last weekend, when I was unpacking, I walked into the kitchen and my partner literally, I think, saw me go into what he called a cognitive wormhole trying to organize the kitchen. Like I was paralyzed and I was standing there and I need you all to imagine, I've got my like hair in a messy bun and and I decided I randomly took out my whiteboard and a notepad to organize the kitchen and unpack the kitchen. And he walks in after like 20 minutes. He's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I've realized. And I'm like, it's just like, I look like a crazy person. I'm just like, I've realized that you actually can't start to unpack any of the boxes. Because if you unpack one box and you put it away and you decided that then halfway down this rabbit hole, you're going to find out that this cabinet actually isn't where the spices should go. The oils should go here. Then I'm going to have to take everything back out again and then replace the thing. So really, I just need to strategize and plan the entire kitchen and then I can start moving. Yeah. But in that moment, I totally caught myself because I was in a state of inaction for a very long time. And then I got exhausted. And then I felt like I needed a drink and I needed to go sit down somewhere. I was like, I'm so tired now and I haven't even done anything yet. It was just like a terrible reminder. And I hope that feels like I study this stuff and I still struggle with it because this is a human phenomenon. And I realized all I need is just a small win. I just needed to break the perfectionism bubble. The kitchen was untouched. All of the boxes were there. They were perfectly still taped and it was perfect. And I just was so petrified of messing it up and going about it the wrong way that I'm stuck in inaction. So all I needed to do was honestly just mess some shit up first. And once I messed it up, you break the bubble. You just got to mess something up. And then it's like, well, okay, well, I've already kind of started and it's kind of crappy already. Well, let's just keep going. So I was in action for the first few hours of the day. Once I just literally, and it wasn't even my fault. My partner just randomly started putting stuff away and I lost my shit. And I was like, that's not where that goes. And it's like, well, where does it go? And I was like, well, probably there. And it's like, okay, I'm just going to start putting it away. And I was like, oh, right. Okay. Right. Okay. Well, get out. I'm doing this and this is my project. And then I get to start messing up in my own sort of playground. And to me, I kind of think of it as a play. I get to get messy in my sandbox. And I think it's important to let yourself get there. And that's how, in my own personal lived experience, I deal with the mixture of both procrastination, perfectionism, and perceptions. But I'm kind of curious now to hear from you all about how you all have experienced this and how you all may want to deal with it.
Thank you. This is a great acting that you just did. That's exactly what happens to me when I need to break, when I need to start a project. That's always how I act out. It's so weird. And I understand it. And thank you for sharing that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, of course.
Actually, before we got on this call, I have a big presentation to do the day before mat leave to try to get approvals from a bunch of people who are not very interested in approving what I have to propose to them. And I have like a deck. I don't even need to contribute that many slides. It seems totally feasible that I could have done everything in the 2 hours that I had this morning. And yet I was obsessing over certain things. And I do find that I go through this process of like needing to kind of like start and throw things at the board and then think about it and then like maybe leave and go on to something else and come back to it to organize it more to get it in a good place. But it always feels so much more laborious than it seems like it should. And I'm just like, why can't I do this in 2 hours? I'm sure these other people would bang it out and just like be done with it. And instead I have all this time and like cumbersome process that I go through. So I don't know if there's a way around that, but yeah, I mean, it's a bit of breaking down the project, but the project still feels much bigger than I am.
So I have one piece of advice that, by the way, has been, according to like Harvard Business Review, like multiple different mini studies across decades, the number one method to really getting shit done and getting just being productive across the board. And that's something called time boxing or time blocking. And I'm sure you've heard of it, but it's literally just, instead of focusing on tearing down the scope of the actual project into tiny pieces, which is can be difficult to do, and an emotional process in and of itself sometimes, you instead tell yourself, I only have 15 minutes to chip away at this project, and that's all the time I get. It's what Julia was saying. It's like right at the last minute when you're running out of time, you just bang it out. You just knock it out and it's great. Actually limiting the amount of time that you have has a tendency to make all humans work a whole lot faster. And I'm actually curious, Amy, I used to work in a developmental psychology lab, and we used to run these experiments on young kids, toddlers specifically. And I'm curious to know if you've ever either tried this or experienced this. And now I'm like, I'm worried you're going to go do this on your other kid. But we would, at the end of, so we had a lot of obviously chaperoned play that we would observe, right? It's a developmental psychology lab. So we were just like, we have a bunch of researchers, they're playing around with kids. We all like love kids, obviously. So we're just like sitting there, like, playing with dolls and toys and all these things with them, just to see, how they think and what they're up to in their heads. And then at the end, before their parents pick them up, there's toys, as you might imagine, everywhere. So we usually would ask them to put the toys away. And I know that's like a hilarious request for a toddler. It's like, could you do this task from start to finish? So they would start the task, and then by toy number 3 that they're trying to put away, they would get distracted and start playing with it, and then lose track of what they were doing, and then blah, 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 they're gone. Like they're gone in some other random Disneyland world in their heads. So I remember this one faculty member that has an expertise in child psychology came in, and they said, wait a minute, you guys have to play a song. And I'm like, what do you mean? And it's like, no, you have to tell them that they need to finish putting the toys away by the end of the cleanup song.
Conditioning.
What was that?
Conditioning, yeah.
Yes, exactly. It's not just the conditioning, it's the time boxing. Humans, even when we're little, have a tendency we work faster if you give us a deadline. It's kind of a mess up trick to play on yourself, but it is true. And it is all humans, even when we're little, we don't grow out of it. But pretty much what you say is if you give a child 3 hours to clean their room, they will take 3 hours, and there's a high likelihood that they won't even do it to completion. If you give them 3 minutes, they will do it as fast as they possibly can in those 3 minutes, because it's a ridiculously small amount of time that you've given them to do the task.
I just find it so hard to like trick my brain into it because I know that it's arbitrary and that like there's more time tonight. I like really fall into this trap of there's always more time tonight. And I have a really hard time getting myself out of that awareness. But yes, I agree. If there's like something where shit's blowing up, I can bang out a memo and be like, this is the decision we need to make because I have a real deadline. But when it's self-imposed, I've not had a lot of success in like actually holding myself accountable to that defined period of time.
Yeah, I would suggest one thing, if it's okay. And then I know we're up on time, so I'll have to shut up and go away now. But one thing that I really, really suggest is finding some sort of accountability partner or system. Telling someone that you're going to get something done by a certain time. And I don't mean like a random colleague. I mean like a friend that you actually care about. Someone in this circle. Honestly, if I can give you my number and you can just text me and say, Sahar, I'm going to finish this document by 6. And then I have a lot of people, by the way, that do that with me. And I do that with other people. It's like, and I want to normalize this type of thing because this is truly like you're working in line with your biology and you're using biological principles and realities in order to optimize your life. Humans are pack animals. At the end of the day, this is the problem, Amy, is that you do not want to live in a vacuum. And if given the opportunity, you will prioritize other things and other people over yourself. And this is unfortunately just how all humans fundamentally actually have a tendency to operate. And it's because we're pack animals. We're the most social animal on the face of the planet. Using that to your advantage can be done by just having an accountability partner where you guys can both promise each other that you're going to get X and Y done, and you just report back to each other. So I actually do this all the time, actually, with my partner at home. I do this with a couple of girlfriends. We sometimes actually, by the way, get online together and we knock our project work out. We don't work at the same company. Like we have nothing to, I have no idea. Like the details are not important to me. But we schedule time. We schedule an hour where we don't have meetings and we say like, let's get online and bang some work out. And then we get on and I go, hey, and then literally I say, what are you going to get done in the next hour? And she says, I'm going to get X, Y, and Z done. And I say, okay, great. Well, here, let me look at my list. Okay, so I need to get this task done. And then we actually break it down into tiny, again, going back to this thing, it's not just enough to get online. If I just say, I need to finish this project in an hour, that's too big. So I say, I'm going to do this for the first 10 minutes and for the next 15, I'm going to do this. But we just stay online together. Like we're on mute. Like it's not, no one's staring at each other. You know, it's not like a meeting or anything, but there is a sense of, I know that if I just ignore my own tasks, then it will start to over time make her feel less confident in this whole system. So for her sake, I will just light a fire under my butt and just get it done and get it. And it's not going to be perfect, but we're fighting the perfectionism because you can always go back and make it more perfect later. But it's about movement and just putting one foot in front of the other. And sometimes we also, because it's a close friend, we can complain a bitch about it too. Like she can say, I really don't want to do it. I'm like, I know. And then sometimes we'll call each other out because we've been doing this so often is that, I'll say like, oh, I need to get like 15 emails out of the way. And she's like, I'm analyzing data. Hell no, pick something harder. And I'm like, fine. Okay, then I'll do this other thing. So really, and I know that's not the fanciest sort of solution, but in my world, it's fancy because we're exploiting biology. We're admitting that we're social creatures and this is just how we operate. Literally like that's how organizational psychology works. Is that there's accountability within the organization and that's how we get things done. Otherwise, nothing's going to get done. Everyone's just going to sit around, sipping a Mai Tai, watching the sunset and enjoying themselves.
Wouldn't that be nice? One thing that we haven't talked about yet in terms of procrastination, that is something that has really helped me as well, getting over the hump sometimes, right? Not always, as I just mentioned at the beginning today, is motivation. I think a lot of people always think that the motivation needs to come first before we can start something. And so they're sitting around and they wait for the motivation to come and then they're like, I'm just not motivated. And when I did a little bit of research on procrastination for one of the videos that I recorded, it was like really simply explained that, in order for the ball to start rolling, you have to push it. Like you don't, there's no motivation there at first, like nothing, it's just kind of stagnant. But then once you get it rolling, the motivation will kind of come in the process. And that was a really helpful image for me to be like, okay, it's okay if I don't feel like super inspired right now to do this or motivated, but with time boxing, for example, okay, I'm just going to do 15 minutes today, that motivation will actually come. And oftentimes we end up sitting on it longer than 15 minutes because we kind of get into the flow of things. And then I always say, and if after the 15 minutes you still feel super unmotivated and nothing has inspired you, then just go away and do it again the next day for 15 minutes. So that's kind of how I think about it. But I really resonated with the emotional misregulation. I think that's very, very interesting. That you just like from a self-image perspective, that sometimes you just feel like you can't master that mountain, right? That's really powerful. Thank you so much, Sahar. This was incredible, so interesting. I always love that you're bringing in that like data research perspective. It makes everything click a little bit more in the brain.
Thank you for having me. You all made my morning. I got to have my cup of tea this morning with 3 really amazing humans. So thank you.
Thanks, Sahar.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I mean, just before we finish.
I think Sahar spent lots of time on my question, so thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sahar.
I have one observation, just a quick one.
Yeah.
I think for me, I have noticed, like, I definitely have chronic procrastination, but whenever I have a great sense of self, I notice that when I'm really joyful, it's not a thing. It doesn't exist. So it's definitely, the emotional thing is on point. And then I have also noticed something, that there are 2 different fear reactions. And it's interesting you said sense of self. I've noticed that the tasks that I think are furthest away from my identity, I totally procrastinate them forever. To the point where I just learned, okay, just delegate them. So I think there's also some element of that. Like maybe it can also be a good diagnostic for where there's a conflict between the task and the sense of self.
I believe that is usually accurate, yes. I don't know if there's a study that's been done on that specifically, but that would follow based on all of the research done, right? So going back to the concept of emotional misregulation, if you don't like the person you're working for, if you don't like the job that you're actually doing, then there's going to be a lot of emotions, a lot of negative emotions that your brain, for good reason, is trained to avoid. So it will do everything in its power to get you to not sit down and do the task, right? Yeah. We need to have that, alignment.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sahar. I really appreciate you and spending the time with us again. As always, so insightful. And I hope we will have you back at some point towards the end of the year, maybe. And this was our last session today for the Academy of Peak Performers. I wish you all a really wonderful summer break. Amy, good luck with everything and some nice first weeks, obviously, with the newborn. And I'm excited to see you back here after August 1st. Okay.
Thank you. Enjoy the summer break.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.